Thank you for making CNN 10 part of your day. I'm Carl Azuz at the CNN Center. We're kicking off the month of April with the subjects of digital copyrights and clouds of pollen. But before that, we're explaining a milestone involving the Dalai Lama. It has now been 60 years since the Buddhist leader fled from his homeland. That land is Tibet. Officially, it's an autonomous region of China, meaning Tibet has the authority to govern itself, but is still ultimately ruled by China. The Dalai Lama is Tibet's spiritual leader, and he used to be its physical leader too. That changed in 1959 when the Dalai Lama left the region to live as a refugee in India. In fact, today he jokes that he's the longest guest of the Indian government. At 83 years old, the monk has said age and exhaustion are the reasons why he's cut back on travel recently. And questions about who the next spiritual leader will be and how the position will be filled grow with each passing day. The current Dalai Lama is the 14th in Tibet's history. The title's traditionally given to the highest-ranking leader among Tibetan Buddhists, and millions of them see the Dalai Lama as a living god. But China's communist government has strict controls over the practice of religion in the country. It says the Dalai Lama must comply with Chinese laws and regulations and follow religious rituals and historical conventions. That's why China wants to fully control the appointment of the next Dalai Lama. Many Tibetans living in the region and abroad are not willing to accept that. And the current spiritual leader says if China chooses the next Dalai Lama, Tibetans will neither trust nor respect the person. So uncertainty clouds the future of this highly influential role.
It's been 60 years since the Dalai Lama last set foot in the land of his birth, Tibet. He was identified as the new Tibetan leader by a delegation of monks when he was only a child, and he was given full status as Dalai Lama at the tender age of 15, a process that was sped up as Chinese troops marched over the highlands into Tibet to take control in 1950. Chinese leader Mao Zedong offered autonomy but demanded obedience from people in the region. The Dalai Lama took part in a series of peace talks with communist officials, but then there was an unsuccessful armed uprising against the Chinese in Lhasa on March 10, 1959. And the same year this photo was taken, showing the Dalai Lama on his throne in Lhasa, he fled across the Himalayas into India. Since then, the Dalai Lama has lived in exile in northern India. In 1989, he won a Nobel Peace Prize for his dedication to the non-violent liberation of Tibet. The Dalai Lama has always said he has only ever wanted enough autonomy to protect traditional Buddhist culture in Tibet. Chinese authorities insist he is a separatist, trying to establish an independent Tibet, calling him a wolf in monk's robes. Beijing says the Tibetan region has been China's territory for centuries and denies any oppression since 1950, saying living standards have greatly improved for the Tibetan people. In 2008, there were days of demonstrations which turned into riots in Lhasa. That led to a crackdown in which Chinese state media says 20 people were killed. Tibetan exiles say it was more like 150. In 2011, the Dalai Lama announced plans to devolve his political power to an elected leader of the Tibetan exile movement. A few years later, in an interview with CNN's Krishan Amanpour, he explained,
"Might you be the last Dalai Lama?"
Possible, last Dalai Lama. I personally feel better. The people should take full responsibility.
Beijing says any new Dalai Lama chosen in Tibet would have to be approved by the communist government, leading the current Dalai Lama to speculate his successor could come from outside of China. In 2016, CNN's Matt Rivers was one in a group of journalists who were able to make a rare visit to Tibet on a state-controlled trip. Buddhism is one of 5 officially recognized religions in China, but under tight government supervision and surveillance. And that is very much the case for the 6 to 8 million Tibetan Buddhists, many who have left the region.
10-second trivia. Which of these nations is not currently a member of the European Union? Hungary, United Kingdom, Lithuania, or Switzerland? Switzerland isn't a member of the European Union, though it does have trade agreements and ties with the EU. About a week and a half ago, we told you how the European Union had hit Google with another fine for hindering competition. Well, technology companies, including Google, could wind up owing more money to the EU under its new copyright rules. When it comes to books, songs, art, and movies, a copyright gives a person or a business permission to make copies of the work or publish and sell it. Media companies and artists have said the EU needs to update its copyright protections for the internet age and make sure the copyright holders are fairly paid for their content. But critics of the new EU rules say they're too vague and they could lead technology companies to block too much content in an effort to stay out of trouble. European officials say it could take 2 years to implement the rules.
The EU is poised to deliver a major blow against big tech with new measures that could place an enormous responsibility on tech platforms when it comes to taking down copyrighted material. And this isn't the first time that the EU has been on the forefront of regulating big tech, whether it's data protection, antitrust violations, tax violations. On all those, the EU has led the charge on cracking down on tech companies.
And this is illegal under EU antitrust rules.
But critics are arguing that these new regulations are not just a blow to big tech, but also to internet freedom by potentially chilling the average user's ability to create and post content. The rule is called the European Union Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market, and it aims to protect copyrighted content on the internet. Sounds good in theory, but various parts of the directive are proving to be controversial. One of those components would make online platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Reddit all liable for copyright infringement on their platforms. Now, this provision is extremely vague, so no one knows exactly what it will look like in practice. But what it's suggesting is that online platforms use content recognition technologies to examine every single piece of content that's uploaded to their sites. That is an enormous task. For YouTube alone, that means filtering the more than 500 hours of new video uploaded to the site every minute. And it's not just video, even memes could potentially get these sites into legal trouble, since the images used in memes are often sourced from copyrighted content. Supporters of the new law point out that memes are actually protected because a meme is a parody, which the directive still permits. But critics argue that it's unlikely that these automated content filters are going to be able to tell the difference between a copyright infringement case and a parody case, which could mean that a lot of content used legally may get caught in the crossfire. And that's not just theoretical, it happens all the time. In 2016, ironically enough, YouTube's content filter mistakenly took down a speech made by the EU Trade Commissioner, and that video was even uploaded by a member of the European Parliament. So the goal of this provision is to make sure that the original copyright holders are paid their fair share. But for a law that's meant to shift some power away from big tech, it might actually end up helping them. That's because right now, building an automated content filter requires a lot of capital. Capital that only big tech companies might have access to. Google alone has spent more than $100 million for YouTube's current Content ID filter, a filter that still mislabels videos all the time. For those platforms that don't have $100 million to spend, the consequences of the rule change are unclear. But what is clear is that companies like Google already have an upper hand in this space. So we don't know how exactly this will all play out, but what we do know is that this has the potential to change the internet as we know it around the world, not just in Europe.
Tis the season for some sneezing, and if you find pollen appalling, you're gonna hate this. This video was shot from a helicopter passing over the woods. The clouds you see are the pollen, the masses of yellow fertilizing grains that the helicopter is blasting off the pine trees. Those of you with allergies are thinking, fly higher. This was shot recently in Georgia where allergy levels are high, and that's not helped by this low-flying chopper. If your eyes are watering, that 10 out of 10's a bust. Allergic sinuses and noses all flare up in a cloud of dust. It's unjust. In a gust, a tissue for us is a must. Springtime everywhere gets in your hair and coats your throat in crust. But you can trust that when the rain comes, your head becomes aware. It grounds the pollen down, it's bound to finally clear the air. I'm Carl Azuz taking a deep breath on CNN.